This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, a Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is November 15th. I'm producer Pat, and with me is Christina Roach.
Hey, everyone.
We have two interesting segments for you today. Darren's going to talk to us about whether or not social media is good for us. But first, Christina, what is greenwashing?
Greenwashing is a term I was familiar with. You probably were too, Pat. But I didn't realize how rampant and heinous it was until I started to learn more about it.
Okay.
Kind of reminds me of when Darren did voluntourism.
Okay.
It's like, oh, voluntourism, yes, people go to these foreign countries and highly recommend going back and listening to that segment if you haven't. So greenwashing crossed my radar on a recent episode of the Russell Howard Hour, a British topical comedy news show. One of the recurring segments that I enjoy is Playground Politics, where Russell chats with young school kids around 8 or 9 years old about various world topics. The topics are serious, but as you can imagine, the segments can be very funny because kids say the darndest things. Recently, his guest was Greta Thunberg, and the topic discussed with the kids was the climate. For those unfamiliar, Greta is a 19-year-old Swedish environmental activist who became famous for challenging world leaders to take immediate action for climate change mitigation. She was the Time magazine's Person of the Year in 2019. And they kind of gloss over when she mentions it, but Howard had never heard the term, so he dedicated a segment to it on a subsequent show. I linked to both YouTube videos in the show notes. Coincidentally, the latest newsletter from Truth in Advertising, aka Tina, popped up in my inbox the same week, and it was about companies accused of greenwashing. Do you think the universe is trying to tell me something, Pat?
To do it on the show, I guess. Yeah.
So what is greenwashing? I have so many links in the show notes as there's so much great coverage on the topic, so please do check them out if you want to dig deeper. Here's a definition from a great article Investopedia published a few days ago. Greenwashing is the process of conveying a false impression or misleading information about how a company's products are environmentally sound. Greenwashing involves making an unsubstantiated claim to deceive consumers into believing that a company's products are environmentally friendly or have a greater positive environmental impact than they actually do. Greenwashing also refers to a company's attempt at trying to cloak their involvement in environmentally damaging practices by emphasizing the sustainability of a product. Now, one of the more egregious and blatant examples you may remember involved automobile manufacturer Volkswagen and the 2015 emissions scandal, also known as Dieselgate, of course. In short, Volkswagen vehicles were found to be emitting nitrogen oxide pollutants up to 40 times the legal limit, even though they described their diesel engines as being as clean or cleaner than US and Californian requirements. This enabled them to tap into tax exemptions and green car subsidies. Now, what's worse, an investigation exposed that VW went to great lengths to manipulate vehicle emission tests in their favor by using a software-based defeat device, which essentially fooled testing software.
I really thought that was going to be the end of Volkswagen.
Me
but
too.
They did kind of an amazing job with the We're Sorry campaign that they did.
Yeah.
Because they're pretty much as strong as ever.
Yeah, I thought that was really going to run them into the ground, but after being confronted, they admitted that 11 million of their vehicles were equipped with the device and eventually pled guilty to 3 criminal charges and were fined $2.8 billion along with $1.5 billion in fines to resolve civil cases. In Russell Howard's YouTube video, he highlights clothing retailer H&M Group. The Swedish company pioneered fast fashion, a term referring to inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass-market retailers in response to the latest trends. You likely have an article of clothing in your household from a fast fashion brand because there's a ton of them. Zara, H&M, Urban Outfitters, Mango, Old Navy, ASOS, Topshop, etc., etc. Here's the script from one of the H&M Conscious Line ads that Howard features in his segment. I'll read it as much like the narrator in the commercial as possible so you get the full marketing effect.
Right.
Where some see waste, we see potential. Where some see rubbish, we see beauty. And where some just see scraps and leftovers, we see the beginning of something new. Because we are changing fashion starting with the things that used to be thrown away. So from now on, let's wear the waste.
Oh, boy.
I can't believe I got through that last part without laughing. Let's wear the waste. That's the tagline. But as Howard highlights, citing articles from Fast Company and The Big Issue, H&M is one of fashion's biggest polluters, and their conscious collection made from sustainable materials were found to contain, quote, a higher share of damaging synthetic materials than its main line, 72% compared to 61%. In fact, they really don't offer any specific info in product descriptions about why buying stuff from this line is better for the environment. More importantly, says Fast Company, experts argue that none of the solutions H&M is exploring, from recycling to using eco-friendly fabrics to shifting to renewable energy, will have an impact if the company continues to churn out billions of clothing items every year. Very good point.
This sounds remarkably like organic, right? Or some phrases like I know we've covered on the show. It's just like they're sort of meaningless. There's no definition of.
But I mean, in this case, they are doing these things. They are, recycling, and they're shifting to renewable energy. But what's the point if there's no impact? Right? Exactly. If you're churning out, as they say, so many clothes.
Yeah.
An article that Tina.org links to, titled Consumers Willing to Pay Up for Sustainability, cites a 2019 U.S. Consumer Sustainability Survey that found, quote, more than 2/3 of Americans consider sustainability when making a purchase and are willing to pay more for sustainable products. In fact, Gen Z shoppers were willing to pay 50% to 100% more compared to other age groups.
Wow.
Now, celebrities can often be some of the worst offenders, especially considering their influence. Kim Kardashian's Skims brand has packaging that literally says in bold letters, literally on the package, I am not plastic. But an investigation found that the packaging is in fact made from a type 4 plastic or low density polyethylene. In fact, the recycling logo on the package has a 4 in the middle of it. Now, a welcome wake-up call for fast fashion may just be a recent lawsuit against H&M, who is under indictment for greenwashing in federal court in New York. The plaintiff is an American marketing student named Chelsea Commodore, who accuses the company of lying about the sustainability of its products, leading consumers to spend more money on falsely sustainable products. We'll see where that lawsuit goes in time, but it is a wake-up call to other fast fashion companies. Greenwashing is dishonest and unethical. It misleads investors and consumers that are genuinely seeking to support environmentally friendly companies or products. And people who are truly seeking out environmentally friendly products or companies are not only being misled, but ripped off because these quote-unquote sustainable products are often sold at a premium. And people are willing to pay for it. Now, this brings me back to our friends at Tina. Please do check out the link in their comprehensive article on companies accused of greenwashing. It is really eye-opening and in many cases, at least to me, infuriating. The fact of the matter is that genuinely green businesses or products back up their sustainability claims with details and facts. Remember facts, Pat? Remember when those mattered? Now, as Howard says, you see eco buzzwords everywhere, but just because there's a sticker on something doesn't mean it's true. As always, make sure and do your homework, checkers. I know the holidays are coming up and you're going to want to buy products or clothing for friends and family. So yeah, if that really, really matters to you, do your homework and make some good choices.
I'll say, in addition to checking out the things that you suggested from Tina, that people just check out Tina in general.
Yes.
They are a really great organization. Their newsletter is very informative. I know that we've reached out to them and they've agreed to come on the show, and we just haven't gotten around to it. We'll definitely do that at some point.
Yeah, and they don't inundate you with newsletters.
No. And it's all the information gold.
Yeah, it's all really interesting, eye-opening stuff.
Well, thanks for that, Christina. And with that, we will turn things over to Darren. Hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Hi, listeners. I hope you're doing well. Today, I'm going to explore the topic of whether social media is bad for us. You might wonder, isn't the answer an obvious yes? That was a trick. There's no way a regular listener would have said that, knowing that I don't usually do segments with obvious answers.
Fair.
You must be new around these parts. In short, it's very complicated to provide a good answer to this question, and I'll help to show you why. And hopefully the journey into a possible answer is part of the answer itself. Isn't that some lame answer you get from an adult when you really want some clarity? Mm-hmm. Getting on with the show, have any of you youngsters out there ever used the Facebook, the Twitter, the TikTok, or the MySpace?
Not all at the same time.
What's that? That last one doesn't exist? Well, anyway, social media. I'm sure you've heard of it. And you might even be checking it right now because you're multitasking and this isn't sufficiently entertaining. I'll try to be more captivating. No. Anyway, in our current modern age, it is reasonable to ask whether social media is making our lives worse.
Yeah.
Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has been interested in this question for a while, and it is part of his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which came out several years ago.
Great book.
I also recommend his first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, and his second book, The Righteous Mind. But note the validity of his explanatory framework for that second book, Moral Foundations Theory, is debated by researchers. Anyway, in April of this year, Haidt wrote a piece in The Atlantic called Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. Haidt puts the blame on social media for a variety of reasons, with two of them being that it is very easy to attack each other in ways we would never do in person, and it is very easy to have our views reinforced. Social media, and this is Haidt, quote, unwittingly dissolved the mortar of trust, belief in institutions, and shared stories that has held a large and diverse secular democracy together. That's pretty strong and powerful. Yep. And many people feel this way. But is it true? How might we find out? Perhaps some sort of meta-analysis reviewing the literature? If that's your thing, today's your lucky day. Excellent. Last November, Haidt, the same guy, along with Chris Bale, created a collaborative online document to review, describe, and link relevant research on the topic. They invited a couple dozen researchers, and then the online document became more publicly available after Haidt's Atlantic piece. I should note that while I read the Atlantic piece when it came out and skimmed the online collaborative document, it was a recent piece in The New Yorker by Gideon Lewis Krauss that partially inspired this segment. All three pieces are linked in the show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Great website.
So in that New Yorker piece, and this is one of the reasons to like Haidt, he is quoted as saying, I decided that if I was going to be writing about this, what changed in the universe around 2014 when things got weird on campus and elsewhere, once again, I'd better be confident I'm right. I can't just go off my feelings and my readings of the biased literature. We all suffer from confirmation bias, and the only cure is other people who don't share your own. Good job.
He really is trying to understand the
exactly.
truth, right?
Anyway, how did that online collaborative document go? Simply put, it took off. It's 169 pages long.
Nope.
Yeah. The introductory text at the top of the document, the document is called Social Media and Political Dysfunction, a collaborative review. And then this is the quote, opening paragraph. This Google Doc is an open source working document that contains the citations and abstracts of published articles that shed light on a question that is currently being debated within many democratic nations. Is social media a major contributor to the rise of political dysfunction seen in the USA and some other democracies since the early 2010s? This is too broad a question to be answered, so we break it down into 7 more specific questions for which there is a growing research literature. End quote. And what might those 7 questions be? Well, let me just walk you through the table of contents. Question number 1. Does social media make people more angry or effectively polarized? That's with an A. Question 2, does social media create echo chambers? Question 3, does social media amplify posts that are more emotional, inflammatory, or false? Question 4, does social media increase the probability of violence? Question 5, does social media enable foreign governments to increase political dysfunction in the United States and other democracies? Question 6, does social media decrease trust? Question 7, does social media strengthen populist movements? Now, this other section is other studies not yet classified, major review articles, reports, and databases, books by scholars, proposals for improving social media, and a conclusion. So of those 7 questions, each one has a subsection with a list of studies indicating yes, linked, and then a separate subsection, studies indicating no.
Are they rated by rigor?
No, they're linked in there.
Okay.
Then some of these questions have a third subsection called mixed results or unclassified.
Okay.
More of a catch-all. And at least 2 of these, the first 2 questions, have a 4th subsection, which is a discussion of the question of whether it actually is that question or not.
Okay.
So they're trying to be quite thorough and comprehensive.
Yes.
And it's very difficult because A lot of these have pages and pages of linked studies.
Yeah.
And there's also meta-analysis upon meta-analyses.
They conflict with each other sometimes?
Of course they do.
Oh, how difficult to be right in the world.
Yes. Alas, dear listener, this is not one of those times where I can say I read all 169 pages and thought about the issues in depth and read all the meta-analyses and I'm ready to give you my assessment. It's just too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Why discuss the topic then? Well, for a few reasons. First, to make you aware of the wonderful resource of the online collaborative document itself. Second, so you might be a little less confident in whatever view you have on the matter, given how nuanced and conflicting many of the results are. And third, if you encounter anyone with a really strong opinion, you should ask them why, and see if they understand that there are various conflicting studies and analyses on the issue. Now, I also thought I might try to unpack a few of the specific questions in future episodes. But does that mean I have nothing to offer you today? Of course not. Hey, I wouldn't leave you high and dry. I can't leave you empty-handed. On a couple of issues, it seems like we can provisionally say that there might be an issue, but it is not as bad as you might have heard. The New Yorker piece discusses 3: echo chambers, misinformation, and algorithms. Algorithmic recommended, content is what I'm meaning by that. Mm-hmm. While there are echo chambers, there are typically only a small percentage of users involved.
Yep.
Like just a few percentage. Many people are exposed to a wide range of views, and many of these views are different from the ones that they already hold.
Yep.
Misinformation is a problem, but most people are not exposed to it that much or not in a way that changes their views.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Now you might counter, well then how could it be that so many people believe false things? You guys talk about it every week.
Yeah.
Yes, I have the same question, and it does get at some complications here. It also might segue to the algorithmic issue where supposedly people think that platforms are radicalizing people by showing them more and more extreme content. Yeah. But most studies only look at the supply side and not the demand. Many people want this content. They seek it out and they click on it. And even if they're shown it, they still click on it. The platform shows the videos, but they aren't entirely responsible. So if we go back to the misinformation thing, if I currently have a false belief about vaccines being bad in some way, then I might search for that information. And due to confirmation bias, I find it. And then I see more related content and perhaps even find a community to discuss this belief with. In that case, the social media platform just enhanced and supported my false belief. It didn't create it.
Yeah.
Well, but surely it came from somewhere. Yes, and that is what is hard to determine. I use that example as a glimpse into why it's difficult to study this stuff at all. In the New Yorker piece, Lewis Krauss quotes Brendan Nehan, a political scientist at Dartmouth, and a couple times, and I liked what he had to say. And this is one of the quotes. The expansion of internet access coincides with 15 other trends over time, and separating them is very difficult. Mm-hmm. The lack of good data is a huge problem insofar as it lets people project their own fears into this area. It's hard to weigh on the side of we don't know, the evidence is weak, because those points are always going to be drowned out in our discourse. But these arguments are systematically underprovided in the public domain. And near the end of the piece, as it discusses whether the repeated overstatement of harms may itself be more of the harm, this is quoting Nehan again, there are genuine questions that are really important, but there's a kind of opportunity cost that is missed here. There's so much focus on sweeping claims that aren't actionable or unfounded claims we can contradict with data that we are crowding out the harms we can demonstrate and the things we can test that could make social media better. We're years into this and we're still having an uninformed conversation about social media. It's totally wild.
Yeah.
End quote. Wild and not at all where we want to be. Knowing that and working to correct it are important steps. So I recommend you read the New Yorker piece and have a look at the online document. Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, obviously, when you rattle off these questions, I feel like I could say yes, no to some of these questions. There's a lot of things that I think people like. The idea of echo chambers I find really interesting because the internet provides such an ease of access to information. It is impossible to go online for any amount of time and not find a point of view that you disagree with. And that is just going to happen on any social media. So the idea that someone could actually insulate themselves in an echo chamber more online than they could like before when they would live in their own community and only talk to like-minded people and never really expose themselves to other ideas seems really silly to me. And the idea of radicalizing is odd too, because you can be radicalized by the people that you agree with, but you can also be radicalized by the people you disagree with. And I think that happens a lot more than people give it credit for.
Yes.
What pushes people to the right? I think it's the left. And what pushes people to the left? I think it's the right. And it's just seeing the completely insane polarized views that some people have that push the people polarized in the other direction. I think there's a lot of that going on. So there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, certainly a bit of both, because there are some like left-leaning people who move further to right because of left-leaning people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But there are also then who move further left because of the right-leaning people.
Yeah. So
different subgroups, or the same, right?
It depends what you're being exposed to, and it depends on a lot of things. So it's not as easy to say like, oh, I'm just going to take this person. The algorithm's just going to like feed a bunch of like left-wing news to this right-wing person. This person's just going to get annoyed.
Yes.
Right. And if you do the opposite, it's definitely like, if you just give me a bunch of like pro-Trump or whatever, like immigration is bad news, like this is not going to make me more right-wing. It's going to make me think that this is terrible and not like these people. So yeah, it's complicated. And it's hard to,
I don't know, man. Very stable genius. Just give him a chance. Hear him out. So a related thing here is that people sometimes get caught up on all these things and whether they may or not be a problem, which is, of course, related to potential solutions, because how could you have a solution without knowing what the problem is? But there are some proposed solutions that seem just good wins overall, as in like, don't have very young children on social media. Get rid of some of the anonymity of things. So they're trying to make it. How do you make it so people can't attack each other as easily?
Yeah, well,
and even with certain places like Twitter and much of the internet, quite frankly, can you get rid of the bots?
Yes. Well, yeah, bots. I don't think anyone likes the bots. People probably exaggerate how many of them there are. Like Elon Musk is big on like everyone's bots. Elon Musk thinks everyone's bots because everyone who replies to Elon Musk is a bot. But in the normal Twitter, there's not that many bots.
Well, so this will be a future topic. I saw one tweet which said something like 65% of the internet is not human. It's just bots.
Maybe.
But what does that even mean, right?
But that's not the internet that I would necessarily even interact with or be exposed to, or even pay attention to, right? Yes. So if you go to an Instagram comment or something, you'll probably see a bunch of bots. But like, who cares? No one follows those people. No one cares about those people. Other bots follow those people. Who cares? Go talk to each other. Have fun. And when you becomes sentient or self-aware,
then to say that sounds like a sort of presumptuous human. Like, who cares? The bots can follow each other. 10 years later, like, oh, I see what happened. They followed each other.
The bots learned to vote. And
yes, and then the bots like, oh, the humans can just follow each other. Who cares? There's a small percentage of humans.
So yeah, I think there's always an exaggerated view. And my concern is always like I'm kind of a free speech guy, and I think the solution to a lot of the the exaggerated dangers of social media is censorship, and be very careful about when you want to apply that, because you might create a worse situation than you started with.
It's true. It's very delicate and tricky to get this stuff right. Other complexities is that different platforms truly are different. They're different ecosystems. Different people use them. They also use them differently for different purposes. Also, as we know, things are changing in real time. You're not doing archaeology or paleontology or anything like it's a static thing. It's shifting in real time. The algorithms change. Yeah. The platforms themselves realize they have a problem, then they put in more notices. They say this might contain false information. Like, well, now you've just changed what's happening. And so for someone trying to study it, what you're observing is changed. And usually, of course, researchers don't have access to the data they wish they had, which would be so useful. Please share the data more, large platforms, so people can better understand what's going on.
So I had another thought on a potential downside to social media that isn't really talked about in this study, because I think it's focusing on politics. And I think it's just displacement in general. Social media is addictive. You spend too much time on it. You're not doing other things you probably should be doing instead of being on social media. This has been a thing since like the radio, right? Like people listen to the radio and they're not playing or they're not doing whatever, and the novel, and people aren't reading good things because of the novel. And TV was a thing, and video games is the same thing, and social media I think is the same thing. And not to say, like, I've always kind of defended these things, but it's true. At one point you can have too much of a good thing, and if you're spending too much time with something, it can be bad. And I think a lot of people's relationship with social media is excessive.
Yes, right. Or like suboptimal for their own goals.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a good metric. Like, is it serving them in the way they want? Do they say, oh, I'm kind of addicted, I wish I wasn't on it, and they find themselves on it?
Yeah.
The argument that you mentioned about, this being a problem, I just was exposed to, I think, a comment from 18th century Germany where they were concerned about too many books.
Yes.
Right? And then I think if you go back to Seneca, like, it was first century AD or something, like, there's too much information out there. There's just too much, right? And so that's not to say that if someone's making an argument for a long time, it's no longer valid. In fact, it might have been valid each time it's made for different reasons. But it does kind of highlight the it's times change, right? And people can have books and they're not worried about losing their memory, which is what a concern was years ago. Yes, people can't memorize things the same way, but we traded that for understanding other things and leveraging our working space memory in different ways.
Yeah, what was it I read? You don't write things down to remember them, you write them down to forget them. Which is kind of true.
Yes, it's very cathartic.
But as long as I still have it, then it's done its job. I have access to this information if I need it.
Yeah, I posted it somewhere on Twitter. Let me go look it up. Until next time, think better, to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.